I woke up that morning with a strange, gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the calm, comforting morning I was used to in our little town in Oregon. Normally, the air felt fresh, the quiet only broken by the distant hum of life in the streets, the occasional car, or a neighbor shouting greetings across the yard. But today it felt off. I turned over to look at Sarah. She wasn't beside me, but that was nothing unusual. She had always been an early riser, usually already up, having her coffee, maybe making breakfast or catching up on her research. The small town we lived in was quiet, peaceful, even, but today the usual hum of the world outside felt muted, almost as if it too was holding its breath. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the feeling, and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I stood, and the light that filtered through the window shades was dim, too dim for this early in the morning. It wasn't like the usual dawn glow. It felt almost like something was waiting. I moved toward the window, each step feeling slower, more deliberate, as though I could feel something pressing down on me. The view outside, what was usually the sleepy, familiar sight of our quiet town, felt different today. The streets were still, and the sky was wrong. I pulled the curtains back. The sky wasn't just cloudy, it was a deep, unsettling red, swirling in a way that didn't make sense. The clouds twisted in unnatural patterns, moving erratically, as if the heavens themselves had lost control. There was no calm before the storm, no warning. This was something else, something far worse than the occasional thunderstorm we'd come to expect in the past few years, something chaotic, unpredictable. Panic gripped my chest and I couldn't move. My mind was racing, but I couldn't focus on any one thought. I'd seen the reports. We'd been hearing about the changes, the solar storms, the erratic weather. But we thought we had time to prepare, time to adapt. But now, standing at the window, I realized the truth. It wasn't just a shift in weather patterns anymore. This was something we couldn't stop. "Sarah," I called out, my voice breaking through the heavy silence. My heart was in my throat, my pulse hammering. She had to see this. I didn't wait for an answer. I rushed into the kitchen, my feet stumbling in my haste. She was there, standing in front of the window, her eyes wide and unblinking as she took in the same sky I had just seen. Her hands gripped the counter, but I could see the tremor in her fingers. "It's starting, isn't it?" Her voice was soft, almost inaudible, but the question hung in the air like a death sentence. I didn't need to answer. We both knew it. The calm we had known was over. The world outside was no longer the one we recognized. I nodded, but my throat was dry. I couldn't bring myself to say the words. The air felt heavy with what was coming. This wasn't just another freak weather event. This was a tipping point. The storm we had feared was finally here. Sarah turned to face me, her gaze searching mine for something, anything, that might explain what was happening. What do we do? I looked at her, the question echoing in my mind. What did we do? There were no plans for this, no disaster protocol. There was nothing that could prepare us for the magnitude of what was happening. We had been seeing it coming for years, the strange shifts in temperature, the unexpected storms, the droughts and floods that hit without warning. We thought we had time, that the changes were gradual, but this wasn't gradual. This was catastrophic, and it was starting now. "We leave," I said, forcing the words out. My voice didn't sound like mine, it sounded rough, desperate. "We leave now." Sarah's eyes searched mine, looking for something she could hold onto, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her jacket, pulling it on quickly, and I started packing a bag, grabbing anything that seemed essential. Water, a few cans of food, a flashlight. There was no time for second guessing, no time for making plans. The storm was already here, and we couldn't outrun it. "Where do we go?" Sarah's voice cracked. It wasn't a question, it was a plea. I didn't have an answer for her. Not really. We couldn't escape this. No matter where we went, the storm would follow, but we had to try. We had to survive. "We just go," I said. I didn't know where to, but we had no other choice. We survive, we figure it out. And with that, we stepped outside. The wind hit us like a slap. It was sharp, bitter, and relentless. The first raindrops came, heavy and fast, followed by the sound of thunder that felt like it came from deep within the earth. The streets of our quiet town were empty, abandoned in the face of the storm. The trees lining the road bent under the weight of the wind, their leaves twisting and ripping free. It was the end of something, the end of the world as we knew it. And all I could think, as I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her into the unknown, was, we have to make it out, we have to. We didn't waste any more time in the town. Our feet hit the pavement, the ground slick with rain that seemed to come down in sheets, relentless and unforgiving. The wind whipped through the streets, carrying with it the kind of chill that made you question if your bones could withstand it. It wasn't just the weather, it felt like the world itself was turning against us. Sarah kept pace with me, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. She was trying to stay calm for me, I could tell, but I knew her well enough to see through the facade. She was scared, terrified even. And who could blame her? I didn't know where to go either, but all I could think was to keep moving and hope we could find shelter before the worst hit. We turned a corner, heading toward the edge of town. There was an old barn I'd passed a few times, a place we could maybe hide out for a while. But as we approached, the sound of the wind grew louder, like a freight train coming at us, and the sky above, it wasn't just red anymore. It was black, swirling, a storm of such ferocity it looked like it might consume the earth itself. I grabbed Sarah's arm. We need to keep moving. She nodded, her face pale, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Robert, where are we even going? This isn't normal. What's happening? I didn't know. I didn't have answers for her anymore. I was just a man trying to survive, trying to protect the one person who mattered to me. There's a shelter just outside town, I said, though I knew that was just as much a guess as anything. We can make it, just keep up, okay? But it didn't feel like just a storm anymore. It felt like the world was ending and we were being dragged into the chaos. The ground beneath us trembled as if the earth itself was shaking off the weight of what was happening. I looked around, but there was no one else on the streets. No cars, no people. It was like everyone had vanished in the face of this unnatural disaster. We were alone. The storm hit its peak then, something I had only ever read about in textbooks. The wind screamed so loudly I thought my eardrums might burst. The rain was blinding, crashing down in sheets, making the air feel thick, suffocating. And then, just as I was about to speak, I heard it. A low rumble, a noise that didn't belong to any natural storm. It came from the sky, deep and thunderous, vibrating through my chest, shaking the ground beneath us. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. We turned to look up, and that's when I saw it, the flash of light. At first I thought it was lightning, but it wasn't like any lightning I'd ever seen. It was unnatural, almost electric in the way it arced across the sky, blinding and white. It crackled and hummed, as if the storm was alive, as if it had a will of its own. The pressure in the air seemed to double, pushing down on me, making it harder to breathe. My chest felt tight. I glanced at Sarah, but she was staring up at the sky, her expression frozen. The fear was there, yes, but there was something else in her eyes too, something I had never seen before. A quiet resignation. A recognition that whatever this was, it was beyond our control, beyond our ability to escape. And then the ground shifted. We both stumbled, the earth beneath us shaking like it was coming undone. The houses around us, our neighbors' homes, the ones we'd passed 1,000 times before, swayed. A loud crack echoed through the air, and I turned just in time to see one of the nearby trees split down the middle. It didn't fall, it just split, the trunk splintering like a broken bone. The force of the storm was unimaginable. "Robert, we have to go," Sarah screamed, pulling at my arm. She was crying now, her face streaked with rain, but I could see the determination in her. She wasn't giving up, not yet. She would fight for us both. I grabbed her hand tighter, pulling her towards the shelter I had mentioned earlier, but I could feel the pressure mounting. Something was coming. I didn't know how to explain it, but I felt it deep in my bones. Whatever the storm was doing, it wasn't just the weather anymore. It was something deeper, something that had changed the world in ways we couldn't possibly understand. We reached the shelter just as the first real gusts of the storm tore through the street. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the sky lit up again with that unnatural, blinding light. The building, old and weathered, groaned under the pressure, but it held. I pulled Sarah inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Inside, it was eerily quiet, the storm muted by the thick walls of the shelter. We stood there for a moment, trying to catch our breath, the only sound our ragged breathing. "Do you think we're safe?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I had no idea what was going to happen next. The storm wasn't just the weather. It was a force we couldn't comprehend, and it had only just begun. "We are safe for now," I said, though I wasn't sure how much comfort those words offered. "But we have to be ready. Whatever's coming next, we face it together." We huddled inside the shelter, the walls creaking and groaning as the wind outside battered them. The ground shook every few seconds, almost like a distant earthquake, though I knew better than to think it was anything so simple. The storm was doing something to the world, something that didn't fit any of the natural laws we'd relied on. This wasn't a freak weather pattern. This was something else entirely. I kept my eyes on Sarah, watching her try to steady her breath. She was usually the calm one between us, level-headed, grounded. But today, in the face of the unknown, I could see the same terror in her that gripped my own heart. It didn't matter how much we had prepared for this moment. Nothing could have truly readied us for the terror that was unfolding outside. "Robert," she whispered, her voice shaking, "do you think this is it?" I couldn't bring myself to answer her right away. The idea of it, that this might be the end of the world as we knew it, was too terrifying to voice out loud. We had always lived with the assumption that the world would keep going, no matter how strange the weather seemed, no matter how many reports of solar storms we heard. We thought it would pass. But now everything felt like it was unraveling. "I don't know," I said finally. I wanted to sound strong for her, but the truth was, I didn't have a clue what was happening. The world outside was falling apart, and we were caught in the middle of it. Another loud crack of thunder split the air, the sound so deep it seemed to come from beneath our feet, rattling the shelter's foundations. I could feel the vibrations in my bones. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. This wasn't just a thunderstorm. It felt like the sky itself was tearing apart. The shelter seemed to shudder again, and Sarah looked at me with wide eyes. I'm scared, she whispered, voice barely audible above the storm's fury. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? How could I offer her comfort when I was just as terrified, just as lost? But I had to try. I stepped toward her, pulling her close. We're in this together, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. We'll figure this out, whatever it takes. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was trying to hold it together for me, but she was scared, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of us. The storm didn't let up, it only grew stronger. I kept my eyes on the window, watching the way the wind tore at the trees outside, the way the sky pulsed with unnatural flashes of light. It wasn't just the rain or the wind that worried me anymore. It was everything. The way the world felt off balance, the way it seemed to be rejecting us, like we didn't belong here anymore. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that comes when there's nothing left to say. The storm outside was overpowering, and as the hours passed, I could feel the air inside the shelter growing thick, as if it too was being consumed by the chaos outside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the storm seemed to abate, though the strange, unnatural hum in the air didn't go away. The world outside was quiet, unnervingly so. I stood up and moved toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the stillness outside felt wrong. It was as though the calm was just a momentary trick, a lull before the next wave. Robert, Sarah's voice was small, hesitant. What are you doing? I have to see, I said. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe just the reassurance that we weren't completely alone in this, that there was something left outside, something human. Maybe I was hoping that, just once, the world would give us a break. I stepped outside, Sarah following closely behind. The town was eerily quiet. No cars, no people. It was like everyone had vanished into thin air, or worse, had been swept away in the storm's fury. The streets were flooded, the water rising fast, swirling around debris. The trees that once lined the roads were bent and broken, their branches hanging low like defeated soldiers. And overhead, still that same unsettling red sky, the clouds shifting in impossible ways. I felt the pressure in my chest again, the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't just weather anymore. This was something else, something bigger. I didn't know how to fight it, and I certainly didn't know how to survive it, but I had to try. We need to get to higher ground, I said, my voice more certain than I felt. We can't stay here. It's only going to get worse. We turned to head toward the hills that bordered the town, hoping that the elevation would offer some protection. But as we moved, the storm started picking up again, this time with a new fury. The winds howled like a wild animal, and the rain felt like it was being driven sideways, cutting into our skin. We pushed forward, every step a battle against the storm. I could feel Sarah's hand in mine, her grip tight, her knuckles white from the force of it. She didn't speak, and neither did I. There was no need for words now. We just had to move. But as we reached the edge of town, something caught my eye. A shape in the distance, a figure standing against the storm, unmoving. My heart skipped a beat, and I pulled Sarah closer, instinctively protecting her. The figure didn't move. It was just there, standing, its face obscured by the wind and rain. "What the hell?" I muttered. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, swallowed by the storm. I couldn't tell if I had imagined it or if it was something else. All I knew was that whatever was coming, whatever this storm truly was, it wasn't just going to tear apart the weather. It was going to tear apart everything. I pulled Sarah closer, my heart hammering. There was no longer any safety. The storm wasn't just a storm. It was a force that would change everything. We couldn't afford to linger. With each step we took toward higher ground, the storm seemed to follow us relentlessly. The sky above us churned, an unnatural mix of red and purple, a constant, pulsing reminder that we were living through something no one had ever imagined. It felt like a slow, suffocating death, as though the world itself was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own destruction. I kept my focus ahead, but Sarah's grip on my hand was starting to slip. I could feel the exhaustion in her, the way her steps were becoming slower, more hesitant. She wasn't built for this, not physically at least, but she was stronger than anyone I knew in spirit. She wasn't giving up. "Robert," she gasped, her voice cracking. "I can't. I don't know if I can keep going. It's too much." I stopped, turning to face her. Her face was streaked with dirt and rain, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. I couldn't bear seeing her like this. I knew we had to keep moving, but the thought of pushing her harder felt like a betrayal. I cupped her face in my hands, desperate to offer her some semblance of reassurance. "You can do this, Sarah. Just a little longer, okay? We're almost there. We just need to make it to the old church on the hill. It's a solid structure. It should hold." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe me, not fully. Neither did I, but what else could we do? There was no other option. We moved forward, and as we reached the outskirts of town, the landscape changed. The floodwaters were rising, creeping toward the foothills, and the wind was now carrying debris, branches, shards of glass, pieces of houses. Everything was being torn apart. The church loomed in the distance, its spire rising above the trees. It was our last hope. The winds picked up again, howling like a beast chasing us, tearing at our clothes, dragging at our very souls. I could feel the pressure in the air, the sense of something impending. This wasn't just a storm. This wasn't even a natural disaster anymore. It was an event, an epoch-shifting force, and it was only a matter of time before it would break us completely. We reached the church doors, battered and beaten, both of us soaked to the bone. I pushed against the heavy doors and they creaked open with a sound like thunder. Inside it was quiet still. The storm's roar was muffled by the thick stone walls, but I could feel the air inside vibrating, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, exhausted, her eyes closed for a moment as she tried to catch her breath. I sank down beside her, my own body aching from the constant pressure of the storm, but I knew we couldn't stay here forever. "We'll rest for a bit," I said, though I wasn't sure how long we had, "but we can't let our guard down, we're not safe yet." Sarah didn't respond, she just nodded, too tired to speak, and for a while we sat there in the eerie silence, trying to gather our strength. I woke up to a sound, something that shouldn't have been possible. The storm outside had taken on a new level of fury. The wind had turned into something almost mechanical, a constant, humming drone, like the growl of an engine revving higher and higher, the air pressing in on us from every side. The stone church walls, once a symbol of safety, now felt too thin, too fragile. The feeling of something unnatural, something dangerous, was thick in the air. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked toward the window. What I saw outside made my heart stop. The world was changing again. The ground around the town was split wide open in several places, like the earth itself was unraveling. The trees had been uprooted, some twisted into impossible shapes. The sky was pulsing with bursts of light that weren't lightning. No, they were too erratic, too forceful. And then the low hum. It grew louder, more urgent. The very fabric of the world seemed to be coming undone. I turned back to Sarah. She was still lying on the floor, her face pale and drawn, her breathing shallow. "We have to leave," I said, my voice hoarse. "We can't stay here." I knew she was too weak to argue. She was already starting to sit up, her movements slow and labored. There was a quiet surrender in her eyes, like she knew deep down there was no way out of this. The world was coming apart, and we were powerless to stop it. I moved to the door, pushing it open carefully. The storm outside had reached a new level of violence. The wind pushed against me with a force I hadn't thought possible, and the air smelled wrong, metallic, charged, almost like the ozone before a lightning strike. I pulled Sarah to her feet, steadying her as best as I could, and we stumbled out into the chaos. We didn't make it far. The ground cracked beneath us again, but this time it wasn't just the earth shaking. Something else was happening, something that felt like the end of everything. The storm that had started as a freak weather event, was no longer just a storm. It was the trigger for something else, something even more destructive. I looked at Sarah, seeing the panic in her eyes, and then I heard it. The sound, deep and thunderous, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was like the very air was ripping apart, and then everything went dark. I woke up hours later, or maybe days, it was hard to tell. My head was pounding and everything around me was still. Too still. There was no wind, no hum, no lightning flashing in the sky. I was alone. The last memory I had was of holding Sarah's hand, pulling her through the storm, trying to protect her. But somewhere between the cracking earth and the deafening storm, everything had fallen apart. I called her name over and over, my voice a raw whisper, but there was no answer. The world had changed, the earth was scarred, twisted and fractured, and Sarah was gone. The storm had torn through everything we knew, our world, our hopes, our love, and in the end there had been nothing I could do to stop it. I don't know how much longer I'll last out here. Maybe I'll die alone, like the rest of them, buried beneath the wreckage of what used to be, or maybe I'll survive just long enough to understand the full weight of this collapse. Either way, I'm still here, and I'll carry her memory with me, always. But as I stand here, looking out over the broken world, I know one thing for certain. The storm may have taken everything from us, but it hasn't taken my love for her. That will outlast everything else.